The Age of Reason, which began in the late 17th century, was born out of years of massive political upheaval in Britain. It had seen civil war, during which the King left London and set up court here at Christ Church College, Oxford. The war made familiar such words and phrases as Roundhead and Cavalier, plunder, iconoclast, cabal, regicide, Lord Protector, Commonwealth, Restoration, Papist, Nonconformist, Keep your powder dry, and warts and all, a lexicon of faction and dispute, often mortal. The philosopher John Locke was educated here at Christ Church and lived through this turmoil. He developed his greatest work in the 1670s and 80s, an essay concerning human understanding. In it, he argued that better use of language could put an end to disputes and factionalism. If the definition of words could be agreed and misunderstanding avoided, peace would naturally follow. It's a wonderful example of rational idealism. Did John Locke, a man of such supreme intelligence, really believe that by getting the language clear and the arguments stripped to basic simplicities, then, as he put it, disputes would end of themselves? Clearly he did. There is blind faith here at the heart of what seems pure reason. It's a fascination in this story, though. The men of Locke's calibre did think that, in effect, language was the master of life. Perhaps it could rule everything. Locke was a member of the Royal Society, founded in 1660 to promote what we call science, but they called physico-mathematical experimental learning. They tried to write pure and simple English, to avoid what they described as this vicious abundance of phrase, this volubility of tongue. At the time, learned books were usually written in Latin, because Latin was understood internationally and was regarded as more precise. The members of the Royal Society wanted to make English a fit language for scholars, and English began to make inroads into the territory of Latin. Newton had published his Principia Mathematica in 1687 in Latin, but in 1704 his Optics was published, written in English, a new kind of rational English, larded with terms of inquiry and argument.
I proceeded by this analysis to discover and prove the original differences of the rays of light, in respect of refrangibility, reflexibility, and colour, and their alternative fits of easy reflection and easy transmission, and the properties of bodies both opaque and pellucid, on which their reflections and colours depend.
Here was a new vocabulary of reason and investigation. Refrangibility and reflexibility were words coined by Newton to allow him to describe his experiments with refraction and reflection. Transmission had been used before to mean passing from one place to another. Newton changed its meaning to describe passing through a medium. And opaque had meant unlit for 200 years before the 17th century changed it to mean not allowing the passage of light. The word lens had only been coined a decade before Newton used it in his book, and as he reported his observations, he also gave English the terms indistinctness and well-defined. The scholars were reframing, redefining, and refashioning the language. They made it part of their apparatus, and there's another word that took on its meaning as the equipment for an experiment during this period. There appeared to be a growing and general confidence in the state of English. Printing presses were no longer licensed, and they had spread and proliferated. For the first time, daily newspapers were being printed and circulated. Reports of events around the globe went into the hands of ordinary people. The fashionable meeting places of the day were the coffee houses. It was in places like this that people read and talked about the news. This one sold coffee until just a decade ago. Now it serves up stronger fare. Printed English had become part of the fabric of daily life, as it had never been before. Here's the first issue of the Daily Current for March the 11th, 1702. The news comes from the War of the Spanish Succession, that the French have sent over 20,000 troops to Italy. There was a massive appetite for this news. Joseph Addison told the readers of his magazine, The Spectator, that different papers cooked the same news in different ways, and that no one could bear to leave coffee houses like this one before they'd read all the different versions. But coexisting with the exuberance of Grub Street and the coffee houses, possibly as a result of it, there was a deep anxiety about the state of the English language. There was no Royal Society here protecting English from vicious abundance of phrase and volubility of tongue. There was no John Locke pressing the case for agreed definitions and clarity of meaning. The greatest worry was that English itself was changing. The poet Geoffrey Chaucer was still revered 3 centuries after he'd written the Canterbury Tales, but by then he'd become difficult to understand. The satirist Jonathan Swift, writer of a series of bogus travel diaries we know today as Gulliver's Travels, voiced his concern.
How then shall any man be able to undertake his work with spirit and cheerfulness, when he considers that in an age or two he shall hardly be understood without an interpreter?
The aristocracy couldn't be relied on to set the example. Swift hated the vulgar liberties, as he saw it, that they were taking with the English language, the way they clipped vowels out of words or abbreviated them, rep for reputation, pos for positive, incog for incognito, and the one that survives as standard English today, mob, from the Latin mobile vulgus, the common people. In coffeehouse society, elegant English was supposed to consist of long Latinate words. These shortenings were considered crude. And Swift also hated what he thought of as merely modish words like banter, bubble, bully, cutting, shuffling, palming, and sham. Swift found a model in the classical languages, Latin and Greek. Those languages, it was thought, had survived because they never changed. They were carved in stone. Swift would save English by arresting it, putting an end to changes. He would take control of English and take it away from the anarchy of the upper-class bloods and their slang. In 1712, Swift proposed the foundation of an academy for correcting, improving and ascertaining the English tongue. The academy would replace the aristocracy. Ascertain was the big word. English was to be fixed, ascertained, forever. No matter that the French and Italians already had academies that had failed to halt changes in their languages, Swift's determination was ferocious. One critic sneered that he was attempting the impossible, and he said, "May as well set up a society to find out the grand elixir, the perpetual motion, the longitude, as to fix our language beyond our own times." Well, he was wrong about longitude. Swift even took his case to court and proposed his scheme to Queen Anne, saying that only classical English would endure to report her glory. But she died 2 years later, and her place on the throne was taken by George I, the German king, who spoke little English and cared about it even less. Swift's plans were dead.